question. I have your program up right here. We're going to start with power exercises. So some of the actual realities of the first, sometimes even the second and the third session with our neurodivergent athletes, things to consider is even with a highly individualized visual schedule or text schedule, a combination of both visual and text, when our athlete goes to that board and we invite that athlete to make a choice about that exercise, there are some considerations, compassionate considerations, that we need to keep in mind. Number one, that athlete may not have ever been in that environment before. That's something that we're going to know. Has the athlete ever been in the gym environment? If we're working in home, obviously they have been in the environment. If it's a classroom, adapted PE, or clinic where the athlete is already familiar, then yes, the environment is not going to be as big a factor in that the athlete is already understanding of where everything is taking place. However, what is taking place is going to be a difference maker. So if we have an athlete, and this is highly typical with our autism and neurodivergent life skill athletes, that they've never performed any of these exercises before. So even though we are providing a choice, which is really important in that onboarding process, even if we are providing a choice, which is part of our best practices, the athlete may not yet be making an informed choice about whether or not they want to do a push throw or an overhead throw, a push throw and a sandbell slam, a scoop throw, any of the power exercises that we typically start with. We can do a push throw or we can do an overhead throw back here. I think maybe we'll start with the push throw. Sound good? All right, So if they can't make an informed choice, and it's not to say that we aren't demonstrating the exercises as well for these athletes, but the first time that they see it set up on a board, if they've never done the exercises before, same as any other new trainee or new athlete, if they've never done it before, then they don't have experience from which to derive a decision that really differentiates between those two exercises. Now, a couple, not necessarily competing factors here also, but one big issue is that we want to get the athlete started as soon as possible. We don't want to linger at that board. So if I'm setting up that choice board, or I already have that choice board, that program board set up for my athlete, okay, do we want to start with the overhead throw? Do we want to start with the push throw? And then getting onto the turf or getting started with the session. Because the longer period of time, the latency starts building and building and building, and then it makes it kind of awkward. And look, I'll tell you from 20 plus years of experience and practice, my first session with an athlete in those first couple minutes, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I'm trying to get a read on this athlete, I'm working to make sure that they feel in control, that they feel that they're developing a sense of trust. That's going to come with time. But there are some things early on that I just don't have a read on just yet. So we're learning about each other, myself and the athlete, while I'm also teaching these exercises using our label, demonstrate, do, and cue process as well. So the best practices that we can use, and these are going to be nuanced, and it's not that we need to do the exact right thing immediately. This is a figuring out process. But some things that we can do in order to sustain the athlete's motivation and attention and really establish a positive rapport early on. Using choice, if the athlete chooses the push throw versus the overhead throw, we want to honor that and say, oh, that's a really good choice. Let me show you the push throw. And then we do it. If the athlete switches gears or the athlete is not making a clear attempt to choose one exercise over the other, that's fine. We're not necessarily going to expect that in the first or second session, again, because the athlete may not be familiar with it just yet. So what we can do is we can take the lead and say, okay, well, let's try this push throw first. If we're doing the push throw and we're connecting with the athlete and it's working, great. Here's an example.
2, good push throw, Arjun. Push throw. 3, nice push throw. Ready, catch. Good push throw. 4. 5.
If that doesn't work out, and sometimes it doesn't, sometimes we have an athlete who is dysregulated, or even if they're not dysregulated, they don't understand the expectation for performance just yet. So rather than go with a have to, sometimes we're going to switch it up a little bit. We can go into what we call in autism fitness programming, modify or move on. The push throw doesn't work. And by doesn't work, it means the athlete is not completely engaged. I might move on to a different exercise. So I'm not abandoning the program entirely, but when I'm doing an assessment session, I have a program all set up. I'm using, 8 or 10 different exercises that I want to explore with that athlete during that training session. And that may go perfectly, and we may get to 2 or 3 sets of every single exercise. But we also need to be able to switch gears and say, all right, what is going to be the most viable exercise to implement for this athlete right now? And oftentimes I have found that regardless of the athlete's age, the band row or the band pull down is going to engage the athlete the most. I wish that I had a much more salient and concrete explanation for why this is the case. My experience tells me that it has something to do with the feedback that band provides. It's reinforcing. The athlete likes to grab it. They like to pull on the band. But band pull downs are my go-to when in the initial few minutes of that session with the push throw or with a sandbell slam, the athlete is less engaged and I want to find an exercise that's going to click for them. It's going to be the band pull down, sometimes the band row as well, because there's a clear, I think part of it is because there's a clearly defining beginning and end point. So the athlete pulls the band and then it retracts back. So I think that there's a lot of feedback to that exercise, and that might be why it is so reliably successful in the beginning phases of a session. So almost undoubtedly, your initial assessment session in Autism Fitness through our certification, you get the PAC profile assessment and discover how to use a very workable system to identify physical, adaptive, and cognitive skills as they relate to exercise. But I'm finding clues here in my first session on what the best approach is going to be, not only from the perspective of coaching that athlete, but what exercises are going to work the best initially in their program. Sometimes it's going to be all of our power exercises and all of our strength-based movements, and sometimes we're going to have to decide on 2 or 3 exercises that we think are going to have the most viability or the most success early on for that athlete. And certainly the band rows and the band pull downs work really well. Sometimes it's the push throws, and we get an athlete who just locks in and they're motivated to do the push throw back and forth or the sandbell slams. So the question is one of expanding the program or dialing in the program based on what we're observing from that athlete in the first session and working off of that. Sometimes that program on the board or that program that you have on that athlete's choice board is not going to be the program that we stick with in the first session, and that's okay. The key is understanding where we need to modify, where we need to check in with the athlete, and getting a sense of where can we find sustainability with an exercise. We can go back and forth between 2 exercises for 30 minutes, and that's totally fine. We just want to make sure that the athlete is supported, that we're building that expectation management, and that ultimately the athlete is developing a sense of trust, comfort, and control, which may not all occur in that first 45 or 50-minute session, but those are the things that are going to make a significant difference in finishing up that first assessment session successfully and then moving on to the next one. And it's okay if you don't get to every single exercise. We want to have success with 3 or 2 or even 1 exercise so that we have a baseline to build on for the next session. Love to know what you think about this. Please leave those questions in the comments section below if this has been helpful for you also. And if you're ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, autismfitness.com, you can download the Pro Course syllabus. You can register and start your coursework immediately to become one of our hundreds, soon to be thousands, Autism Fitness Certified Pros around the world. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thanks for watching.